Hello everyone, welcome back. We will continue the conference with a discussion on Jano Garcia's new book, The Herd. Jano Garcia is an economist and the director of the online newspaper El Liberal. He will discuss his new book with Patrick Gray, Associate Professor of English Studies and Director of Liberal Arts at Durham University and an MCC Visiting Fellow. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
There we go. All right, sorry. So it's a pleasure to introduce Alejandro Garcia, or Jano Garcia, born in Spain, where he studied economics, international trade, lived abroad in London, Chile, New Zealand, returned to Spain, where he now directs a program on Libertad, a broadcast which independently through iVox and YouTube, which draws over 500,000 monthly listeners. He has about 1 million followers on various social networks, where he publishes articles on history, politics, economics. He's also the director of the digital newspaper El Liberal, which has become a benchmark in recent times for the exploration of ideas about individual freedom. He is the author. Jano is the author of the series The Century of Criminal Socialism, of which 2 volumes have already appeared, and The Great Manipulation, How Misinformation Turned Spain into the Paradise of the Coronavirus, which has already sold more than 30,000 copies. So we're here today to talk about his new book, El Rebaño, or The Herd, How the West Has Succumbed to Ideological Tyranny. So in this new book, Jano argues that we live in a time when feelings prevail over reason. Public institutions, combined with the power of social networks and the media, have conquered the minds of Western peoples. The result, he argues, is a docile society guided by misinformation and led by imposed dogmas such as equality, climate change, racism, feminism, and state interventionism, dogmas which few today dare to question, given the surveillance of the all-seeing eye. Jano's innovative and revealing book questions the ideological tyranny that subjugates the West and transforms our societies into what he aptly describes, as the title suggests, as the herd. So, Jano, if you want to say a little bit, give us a gist of what the book is about, then we'll move to, I'll ask you a few questions and we'll open it up to the audience.
Yeah, just don't get bored, the audience. First of all, thank you for being here today. I would like to explain a little bit what is about this book. And first of all, I would like to start with a historical review, because I think it's quite important to understand what happened in the last years to have a good idea of what's happening today. So first of all, we have to understand that liberals and conservatives, they were together against the bloc of communist countries that lasts until the mid-80s. Once the communist bloc starts to fall, all these countries, we left, and they realized that the workers have abandoned us, and there was no way to get the support of it, because the result of socialism was terrible. I mean, we have to understand that people were trying to, and risking their lives, trying to raise and take West Berlin and all these issues that we're seeing also today in Cuba and in other countries. So once that happened, the left started to think about, what can we do now? I mean, workers, they don't support us anymore. They have realized that this capitalist system is not too bad. So they find another political subject. It was not workers anymore. And we have seen that these new political subjects, we've seen it with feminism, racism. We will talk about also about global warming as the way they try to introduce their agenda. So when this happened, we've seen with feminism, it's a good point to understand these new dogmas. Because I have the idea that in the West, we have forgot about our religion, and people, I mean, Hungary and Poland are an exception, but in reality, in the majority of the West countries, they don't follow the moral principles of Christianity anymore, so they try to find another way to follow these new religions and new dogmas that we have in, as I said before, feminism, racism, global warming, equality. So they start to use women, and it was one of the dogmas that really helped us to understand what's happening as a way to divide the society. And also they do it, as I said before, with feelings, not without the reasons, with the facts. So what we see today is they talk about women and feminism, but if you are against this new agenda, then the answer is there, because if you're not a woman, you don't understand these kind of issues. And they try to explain to you that they don't have the same rights as men, and they're having a lot of trouble. But when you ask them what kind of rights women doesn't have in the West, then you get answers like the ceilings, they say it about the gender equality also, that's a very important thing, but they always give us just the answer that we don't understand because the identity is the same as racism. If you're not black, if you're not a woman, then doesn't mean that you're not able to understand the problems. So we got the ceiling glass as one of these abstract concepts that we have seen in the days. And this glass ceiling, which has been so in the last years, it really means nothing. I mean, when we talk about glass ceiling, what it means, you cannot explain it with facts. You can only try to explain it with feelings. And then you have the answer if you want to participate in the debate, that if you're not a woman, then you're not allowed to participate in it. And instantly, you're out of it. So these concepts are very interesting, and we have a lot of them these days. In fact, I have done a small resume of these new concepts that I found it very interesting. I will try to read it for you because I think it's interesting to know what's happening in these days. So one of the main reasons on this new system that we have is we have to know that it's forged by the feelings instead of reasons. So in the treatment to the reasons, we're trying to fight the nature of the things, and we're trying to change what cannot be changed. So we could say that we're living under the pregnant man era. So I will explain this process. It won't take a long time, but I will explain this process is the following. The state established through a law that men have the right to get pregnant. Some people let know in public that it is impossible for men to get pregnant. That only can be done by a woman. Then the government launched an awareness campaign and alert against this segment of the population accused of hating pregnant men and denying them a fundamental right. It does not matter that the majority mocking of them are men. The point is that they are pregnant-phobic, men who want to maintain a status of heteropatriarchal oppression designed by society. Over the years, the question central, which is none other than to decide whether a man can remain pregnant or not, takes a back seat, and the debate is divided between those who believe that men should be able to get pregnant and those who maintain that there is an impossible absurdity. Subsequently, emerged subsidized movements that defend men's rights to get pregnant. They must be heard and get our support. The critics start to receive insults as perceived conservative oppressors. Emerged experts and studies supporting the possibility that men can become pregnant. The new generations, educated under the false premise, no longer see that man gets pregnant, and they support the cause because it's totally respectable. It doesn't matter that we keep talking about something that is impossible. We are talking about the rights and freedom of men who wants to get pregnant. The state and the government start to invest hundreds of millions of euros in the cause because, of course, the men are still without power to get pregnant, things of nature. Some start to doubt about the efficacy and meaning of these enormous investments, but they receive heavy corrections from the media and political power. Fascists, conservative, ultra-Catholics, traditionalists are some of the terms used to stigmatize the one who continues to support, which this cause makes no sense. In spite of everything, the state emphasizes the advances that have been achieved in this time and encourages the population to continue defending the men who want to gestate his son. The evidence doesn't matter anymore. Now the debate is divided between the super supportive, empathetic, and diverse against the selfish, insensitive, and traditional homogeneous who hate pregnant men. The figure of the pregnant man emerges with characters that become activists that everyone knows, and they stroll through television sets, radios, press, and also social networks that political power inflates so that the message arrives. Once from time to time, the leaders of this movement receive unpleasant comments and trending topics and hashtags come out, we all have the right to get pregnant. These hashtags are retweeted and shared by politicians and influencers. The important thing is to be next to the good, those who support the pregnant men, and against evil, those who mock with good judgment about them. This is how it's been justified. The waste of money and subsidies continue, and every time more people feel identified with the poor child because society denies it to get pregnant. Above, some throws an insult on his Twitter account, which means a terrible drama. The political parties that previously maintained their rejection, now they moderate their speech and decide to join the crusade or will be quiet so as not to be unpopular. The companies, banks, large capitals, and sports teams begin to give visibility to the poor men who they wanted to get pregnant. Before the games, all players make a process against the pregnancy phobia. A flag is created to represent them. WhatsApp adds it in its emojis. Government creates the World Day of Pregnant Men. Facebook and Instagram bathe with colors of the new flag. Google pulls a doodle. The UN released a resolution recognizing the right of men to get pregnant. Docu-series starts to appear on Netflix in which those men affected tell their personal drama. People cry, meanwhile they be with them. Scissors are made. Scientists publish vast amounts of number of studies supporting the motion. The scientific community suggests that we have been always wrong and men are able to get pregnant. Companies create promotions on World Pregnant Men's Day, and banks consider themselves as free from pregnancy phobia. A man pregnant in Minnesota came out, and a primetime show in the United States. You see, men can get pregnant. Of course, it's not a man. It's actually Isabella, although he introduced himself as Peter. Transhomophobic, that's what you receive if you deny what is happening. It doesn't matter. Isabella is now a millionaire and travels around West countries giving talks and lessons to students. They take her to lead to talk speech of improvement that counts it with hundreds of millions of views. Isabella inspires people, and pregnant men already have their own space in a political debate. The cause becomes eternal, and that justifies the increase in public spending items from aimed at observatories, associations, foundations, and other agencies. The proof that is necessary to continue along the way is that not everyone has the lack of Peter, in reality, Isabella. And if the men do not get pregnant, it's not because it's not possible, but it's because it's necessary to increase the resources to this purpose. The impossibility of the matter has been completely forgotten. Now, there are students' strikes supporting the pregnant men, and what matters is the dignity and aspirations of those men who have not get pregnant yet. Finally, positioning yourself for or against this movement supposes win or lose an election. This is one of the things that I may consider you think that is a little bit overreacted, but I have to say that I think in the next years we will start to have these kind of debates. So we think about what happened in the debates we have in the last 10, 15, 20 years, they've become unreal to have some kind of debates when we talk about the relationship, the human relationships, which are natural relationships. So we're trying to build an artificial relationships between men and women, and we're trying to fight against nature. But these new dogmas, obviously, they require the feelings to get successful, and this is the way they use it to spread in the West societies. But one of those feelings that have been used in the last days, and I would like to talk just about it a few minutes, and then you go with the question if you want, it's about global warming. I found that this is very interesting and very important to fight with it, because when I started to write the book, I did research about what did they say about global warming in the 70s and in the 80s. What was the idea of this doomsday that we are about to get in the next years? So then I start to find some articles, very interesting. And when I talk about articles published in New York Times, The Guardian, The Independent, The Sun, we're starting talking about one of the most important newspapers in the world. I'm not talking about a blog online written by no one. I'm talking about important journalists and important newspapers. So then I realized I'm going to read some of the predictions, because this is the doomsday that never comes, but obviously we always, in about 2 years, we're going to find it. So these are some of the things, and they use the fear to introduce the new dogmas. I'm going to read some of them. In 1967, the New York Times published their famine by 1975. The same New York Times, they also published in 1970, Ice Age by 2000. In fact, it's very interesting because in the 70s, they were talking about an imminent ice age. Obviously, it didn't come up. So, in fact, that changed when Al Gore lost the elections against George Bush, and they started with the global warming, but they have changed the name to the climate change because everything is climate change now. If it's cold, it's because of the climate change. If it's not, it's because of the climate change. If it's raining, it's because of the climate change. If it's not, it's because of the climate change. But that changed a few years ago. In fact, in the 70s, it's very interesting, they were talking about an imminent ice age. Also, this has been published on the Washington Post. In 1997, they said America subject to water rationing by 1974 and food rationing by 1980. In the New York Times, they say U.S. scientists see new age coming, because this is very interesting. We always talk about the scientific community, but who are they? Does anybody know who are the scientist community? This is like the abstract concept that they're using, and then they tell us no, because the scientific community are telling us that we are about to die, the doomsday is coming. And then when you ask them, who are they give you no, there are some scientists have done this report. And then you go to that report and you find there's only 5 scientists. So are you telling me that the scientific community has been composed by 5, 20, 50 scientists? There is no another report who denies that the end of the day is not coming. So that's very interesting, but it's always been used that way. The Washington Post, the same in 1972, nice age by 2020. Also, we have very interesting things in the Guardian, when they said something that the cooling, so it was right, but at least we got a name here, Stephen Steiner, a young climatologist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, reflecting the council of the climatological community. In 1974, Snyder tried to explain to the White House, policymaking group back conditions are likely to worsen and a new ice era is coming. Obviously, we have seen this is not a new ice era, but it's showing the same in the 70s. That changed in the 80s, but we have seen, talking about the Maldives is one of the main reasons they start to talk about the increase of the sea. This is something that they used to hear in the last years. That's what the Guardian published in 1988. Maldives completely underwater in 30 years. That will mean in 2008, the Maldives will be done. Nowadays, everybody knows people who go to Maldives, especially when they got married. They used to go there to get the trip. And the question was 32 islands. Sea level is certainly to completely cover this Indian Ocean in 30 years, according, again, to authorities. By the end of the Maldives, and these 200 people could come in 1992, as predicted. Obviously, it didn't happen. We have more these predictions that didn't come up. That's been published in the Independence Day. Published children won't know what the snow is in 2000. I don't know what's the winter in Budapest, but I'm pretty sure that you have some snow every single winter. In fact, we even have it in Spain last year, so that's pretty interesting that they tell us about 20 years ago that children wouldn't even know where snow is. In 2002, The Guardian published famine in 10 years. This always, the fear, we're about to die and we have to save the world. Obviously, we have to do it the West. We never talk about China. We never talk about India. The Christians stole the winter solstice from the pagans, and capitalism stole it from Christians. But one feature of the celebration has remained unchanged: the consumption of vast quantities of meat. This is something of the agenda nowadays. If you want to be a good person, you have to be vegetarian or at least vegan. Otherwise, you're not a good person anymore. So this is a lot of them. This is something very interesting. This is what they talk about when Al Gore lost the election and they tried to start to change the idea that Ice Age is not coming anymore. Suddenly, We pass of having the ice age to the global warming. We are going to buy about we want to be toast. In 2008, The Guardian published Arctic will be ice-free by 2018. NASA scientists were toast. Hansen, echoing work by other scientists, said that in 5 to 10 years, the Arctic will be free of sea ice in the summer. Obviously, it didn't happen. So I could start been reading a lot of these predictions that we've been suffering in the last years and this apocalyptical scenario that has not come through. But I think it's more important to realize that we should try to forget about these feelings, especially we have seen in this pandemic as well, with the fear, how they've been trying to control us, and how this new agenda and this new dogma of control, that especially is what's happening, in fact, in China. They have this kind of governments that they control every single aspect of our lives. They don't respect the freedom of speech. They tell us what we have to think, how we have to act, and you cannot, if you don't follow all these dogmas, then you get, fascist, or you must be ultra-Catholics, or any kind of these kind of terms, despective that they use to people who denies this reality. So what I want to say, and this is the last thing that I would like to say before we go to the questions, is that we have to follow the facts. And we have to forget about these feelings, because feelings, in fact, it's nothing that we can prove. So it's something very important to know that a lie doesn't become truth just because it's supported by a majority. So we have to think by ourselves, and we have to also don't be feared to say what we think, because this is something that they've been playing in the last years. There was a lot of people, especially conservative and liberal people, they were afraid to say what they think. And they've been accepting this new agenda, bring it by the left, and the right have bought it because they said, okay, we're still winning the elections, and we could win the elections to showing a good economic results. This is a huge mistake. And now we're seeing that what's happening in the West, that this agenda is keep going harder and harder. And in fact, we only have a small places that is not being getting under control. We could talk about Poland, we could talk about Hungary, but nothing else. All the rest of the West societies have been followed under this feelings statement. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So, in a way, you've answered by description one of my first questions, which was, so in his book, Jano introduces the term alogocracy. So, a lot of people talk about oligarchy as a problem, but he says alogocracy in the sense of power without logos, power without reason, as an explanation for some of these difficulties and divides that he's been describing. So I wanted to dig into this a little bit. So as you diagnose, we live in a society where we're very polarized about very basic truths. You have some people who think there can be pregnant men and some people who do not. And many other things like this. Some people who think that certain kinds of police brutality are rampant in the United States, and other people who would say not, and so on. So there are kind of two main explanations of this phenomenon that have arisen, and you seem to be giving a third. So I'm going to run the two by you and then see what you think. So one explanation would be that human beings are not actually very capable of reason, that instead we're religious beings, and that what has happened is that as Christianity has waned in some countries, we've seen the rise of what amounts to a new religion, wokeism or successor identity, or however you think about it, a sort of new religion which is neither is really rational. We're seeing essentially a religious war between Christianity and a derivative thereof. This critique is usually associated with the right or with conservatives, saying wokeism is just a religion in disguise. There's another critique or another account of the cause of this divide that usually comes from the left, which says that the people are being misled by misinformation that they're getting from Fox News and the Koch brothers and so on. And that if the people were just better educated and paid attention to the facts, they would see that we, on the left, we, The Guardian and the New York Times and so on, are correct. Now, it sounds like what you're saying is a reversal of that. You're saying that actually it is the left that is the purveyor of the misinformation, and that the people are being misled by these kinds of universities and institutions on the left. Now, So I wanted to check that with you and then also say that seems to confirm a kind of Enlightenment optimism about the capacity of human reason to solve this. So what do you see as would you agree with that account of your narrative, and what do you see as the solution?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, human being is where it is. We cannot change that. But I have to say that when we talk about left and right, and it's very important to make that difference, nowadays what we consider right, because if we consider right, for example, the Popular Party in the European Union, in fact, there is no difference between them with the left. They support and they defend all those dogmas. They agree with the feminism, they agree with racism, they agree with equality, they agree with all this apocalyptic scenario, they agree that we have to save the world. And all these issues, it doesn't make any difference. So I think what's happening nowadays is a new right, we could consider a new right, which, we got the Fratelli in Italy, we got Bax in Spain, we got Orban here. In some way, somehow, Donald Trump was one of the things that come out of this new right. What he's saying is, okay, we're just trying to follow the interest of the people because it's a huge difference. We have seen this new system, what I call oligocracia. In fact, what they're doing is up and down system. They tell you by media, new press, what you have to be worried about. But this is not what people is talking about. I never met anyone who is very, very worried about the transsexuals. I never met them. But they give you that debate and we talk about it, and with the feelings, then it's like we've seen with the vaccine. If you don't took the vaccine, then you are not a good person. If you took it, you're a good person. It's like they give you their certificate of moral. And that's something that has become for the left. And you said that the left has said, I agree with you, that we are right just following the facts. But which are the facts? You talk about racism and the policy brutality in the United States. If you check the dates, the facts, when you check them, you realize that there is not any brutal policy against blacks. In fact, if you compare with another races, you realize that Indians, they suffer more than blacks. And if I start to say some names here, do you ever heard about Charles Sterling? Any of you? No one did. Why not? Because it was happening under Obama administration. And under Obama administration, it was more blacks killed by police than under Trump's administration. And those are the facts. The thing is, those facts have not been spread to the people. So obviously, human being is what it is. I don't saying that people to go home after working and then start to be in the Department of Justice and trying to do that research and read those reports. But obviously, the facts and the truth is not what they're selling. So I think human being, and this is something one part of the critics, I criticize myself as I'm liberal and conservative, because I think we have not been doing a good job. When the communist blocs and the communist bloc and the communism falls, we thought that we have won and everything was done, and that's not true. In fact, we have to start to separate, and we try to discuss about things and issues that are not important. But that union between liberals and conservative, I think, is happening nowadays. So I think that's one of the parts of the solutions that you were asking for. I think liberals and conservative, even though we have differences between us, we have to work together against a common enemy. Otherwise, we will lose everything. And once we will try to discuss about it, there won't be any chances to discuss. We have this with the freedom of speech, that nowadays is freedom of expression, that nowadays we're seeing that the social media with its fact checkers, and in fact the most important newspapers are controlled by the same messages. So I think this is one of the things that we have to work harder, and one of the solutions, trying to be together and forget about our differences. We will have time to discuss about it, and liberals and conservatives work against this common enemy.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I suppose kind of following up on that for clarification. So with a book where the title is The Herd, one might naturally wonder what your perspective is on populism and the way in which populism has sort of energized the new right. To what degree do you see sort of the people as the solution to this problem? To what extent do you think this should be, is there a necessity of a new elite being in place? Or, what is, so I suppose take someone like Yasha Monk on the left, right, who's a very leftist anti-populist. How would you position yourself vis-a-vis that kind of familiar position? Agreement, disagreement, and in what way?
About populism.
Yeah.
Well, I think when we talk about populism, first of all, we will try to define what populism means. Okay. Because if we think about populism is the way that demagogue works to get the votes in democracy, which is the system that we live in, then all political parties use populism. But I would like to say that populism is the use of feelings to attract the vote of the people, which is different. So when we talk about the feelings, obviously we have seen that in the last years it's been done by the left, not by the right. In fact, this new right is just fighting, and this is not some things that is not even ideological things. I mean, when we talk about energy, for example, we're having this crisis now in Europe with the energy. It's something ideological that you need to have just cheaper energy if you want to grow. Your economy cannot grow if you don't have a cheap energy, if you're not able to get it. So this is ideological. Is it ideological saying that men cannot get pregnant? Is that an ideological thing? Is it ideological that we defend that our borders have to be protected because we have to control immigration? All these things are ideological, it just means common sense. I think that nowadays we're having a debate and the fight is not left and right anymore. I find that nowadays what we're having is feelings against common sense. And feelings is being brazen by left, and just the common sense is being defended not by the right that I said before, the Popular Party we have in European Union. They are with the feelings, just with a small part that they don't even give in a fight, ideological fight. They just, following the common sense. So the best way to fight against this populism is just show the facts and follow the common sense.
All right, sounds good. So if I may, especially for those of us here who might not be Spanish speakers or familiar with the Spanish context, I mean, you yourself have a broadcast on Libertad. You have a digital newspaper that you're directing, El Liberal. So I'm imagining these are part of the answer that you see to some of this. So what would you see as the distinctiveness of the broadcast or the newspaper? What are they offering, and what are the aims that you seek to achieve?
Well, as I'm a liberal and I criticize a lot of my colleagues, I realize that they don't give the fights of the social issues. They just focus on economy. And this is a huge mistake. They just worry about deficit. Yeah, I'm concerned. I'm worried about deficit, about public debt, all these things, about the GDP. Yeah, it's important, employment. I'm not saying that that's not important. Of course it is. But no one has gone to the war because of deficit. No one has risked his life for the public debt. The reality that we have in here is that people, they need a cause to fight with. So the cause of freedom, I found that this is very important. And this cause of freedom is what I'm doing in the last 3 years when I started working in Facebook. In fact, I did because in Spain we have a political party which is called Podemos. I don't know if you heard about it. It's, supporting Hugo Chavez, Cuba, all these kind of Argentinian politicians. And they are part of the government right now in Spain with the Socialist Party. They are an alliance in the government in Spain. And what's happening in Spain and what I feel in Spain is every single year we live more poor than the last. We have to pay more taxes. We are also suffering the illegal immigration, especially we know, Hungary, you have trouble as well with it. But in Spain, we're very close to Morocco. You'll know that. So it's one of the parts, Spain and Italy. We're always, very concerned about this illegal immigration. And we have been suffering all these issues. Insecurity. In fact, the country that I have born is not the same anymore. So that's why I started doing it. And when I try to explain, obviously, it's not only economic issues. In fact, if you ask me, would you prefer to pay more taxes but don't having this kind of immigrants, this kind of, laws with gender issues, I will say yes. So I think it's very important to get that approach. It's very important to give to the people the reason that why it's very important to fight against these new dogmas. Otherwise, what we're seeing is now we're paying a lot of taxes because we've been told that if we pay a lot of taxes, we could save the world. And there are some people that they really think it's possible. And the world, it really depends on how many taxes we pay. It's ridiculous, but it's what we live in. So in this era of madness, I think it's very important to say, let's go back to the common sense and let's fight for the social issues, not only for the economic issues.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So in your opening explanation about this kind of narrative of an example of the cause of men becoming pregnant, I thought about a quotation from Jacques Maritain, this a French Thomist philosopher, where he said, "The true man of the left always rejects what is in favor of some idealized alternative, whereas the true man of the right, the danger is to accept what is, even if it happens to be unjust." So I suppose my question for you coming out of that would be, what do you think is motivating these positions, which you see as so at odds with common sense? You know, why would someone adopt such a unusual, counterintuitive point of view? What's leading to this?
Well, I have to say, I think it's because my generation, we have born in countries, I mean, Hungary is a good example of it. Also, it's Spain. Hungary have a dictatorship, as Spain did. But I have born under democracy, with freedoms, with rights. I don't know what it means to be poor. I don't know what it means to don't have right to do whatever I want to. I don't know what it means to don't have the freedom of expression to display myself. So I think that we have born with all these communities, and then with these people, obviously, and the religion, as we talk about, is being abandoned, unfortunately, those Christian values. And then we try to think that we are better than the people who precede us. So we think that we're so stupid. And we have more important causes. Saving the world, come on. It's one of the most important things you can do in your life. You can save humanity. You can save the world. This is, you know, the new dogma, the new cause, which is more important to try to, you know, raise your family and try to be good with others, with your colleagues, with your parents. That's something that we are not interested in anymore. So I think it's a part of individualistic, in the bad way of individualism, that we don't try to understand. We live in a society, and these Christian values that we're saying to, you know, respect each other and also work together to have a good future has been abandoned. We only think in ourselves, and we're trying to do it in that way. So I think that's very important, that why new generations have been born in this, you know, wildness, that they have tried to get these stupid reasons. And because of the feelings, as I said before, is the way you try to explain it. I mean, if you ask someone what you're doing in the mornings, and they say, I just work in any place, any company, but if now he can say, no, what I do is I work, in a company, but in fact, my main goal is to save the world. It's much better if you present yourself that way. They just, you know, a part of the family, and you're raising your family well.
Yeah. It's a sort of messianic impulse that channeled from Christianity into Marxism into... Well, actually, that brings me to another question. So you've written a 2-volume, essentially a history of a criminal history of socialism, which I find very interesting. And you spoke a little bit about at the beginning about the way that former class-oriented socialism has metamorphosed into what we see now. I mean, one might think of people like Gramsci or Marcuse, but actually, I mean, Lenin as well. Even Lenin, very early on, said, you know, the regular people are not into this. We have to have a vanguard who's doing it. So I was curious if you wanted to say a bit more about how we get from the socialism of class and of the workers, a left which really sees itself as populist, to a left which now is sort of anti-populist and is using different categories than social class as its focus.
Well, I have to say that the big enemy that socialists has is the reality. Okay. So once your biggest enemy is the reality, you always have to try to deform the reality. And you have to try to, you know, send a different points of view to the people. What happened, in fact, you talk about Lenin, who was the first one who realized that socialism didn't work. In 1917, he realized when he started to put in practice all these communist policies that it didn't work. So he changed it. And they say with this new political economic, it was NMPA, they just forgot about what Marx was saying. In fact, even though Marx was wrong, because he was saying that this revolution will be in Germany because it was with the industry and not in Russia because there was no industry. He was wrong as well. But Gramsci was right. Because Gramsci realized when he got in jail, he said, okay, so what's happening in this? Why the revolution has not become in Germany, why not in United Kingdom, and why in Russia? And then he realized there is nothing to be. That's how many workers do you have or not. It's all about how do you send this new dogma to all the segments of the society. So it's in fact it's what's happening nowadays. It's pretty similar. If you realize we have the banks, we have big companies. I'm sure, I don't know in Hungary, but in Spain, it's very important. It's normal to see all the big companies, and it's something very interesting. You can go to anti-capitalism speech. It's been provided by the banks. So you get a seat here, and you got provided by Santander and different banks, and we're going to talk about anti-capitalism. That's happening nowadays. So because all these statements are together working in these new dogmas. It's a very short term, in my opinion, by the companies. They will fall, obviously, in this new system, but they are short term and they don't think about it. So basically, what's happening in this very relation with the beginning, especially of the 20th century, that this tyranny that we're trying to live in today nowadays is coming hard and hard. In the case of the West, but especially in the case of Europe, the European Union is the one who is following and is trying to abuse with this supranational power that they have. They're telling to the countries and giving their sovereignty out. We're seeing with Poland, we're seeing with Hungary, and we will see it obviously with any countries who say, I'm not going to follow these new dogmas because our dogmas that is not good for the population. So basically, what we got here is just the ally, as I said before, the alliance between left and the traditional right, who has become that only we have these new rebels, we could say, that this new right has emerged in the last years, and is the only sense we got to prevail.
All right, great. So I have a lot more questions I could ask, but I also would like to open up to the audience. But yes, but please do send questions if you have them, and I'll be happy to pass them on. So one of the other subjects that you bring up in your book is what you call the all-seeing eye in English, which I'm guessing you get Foucault's panopticon, this idea of the surveillance state, which of course is greatly complicating the possible. Well, I won't answer the question for you. I'll let you. What do you see as the problems cause? What do you mean by that? What problems does it cause, and what do you see as possible solutions or opportunities?
Well, about the all-seeing eye, what I'm talking about is obviously technology has provided us a lot of, just a good development. We are connected as we've never been before. We're allowed to speak with our friend who is living in Australia. It's just some real time. That's very good. That's very interesting. But in fact, we have seen, and this is the cover of the book, is a QR. Because nowadays, if you don't have a QR, you mean nothing. Because that's the reality. I mean, if you don't have a QR, it's just a human being. It's been resumed to a QR, so if you want to go to another countries, or otherwise you want to show, you have to prove if you've been a good or bad citizen. And some of you think that I'm anti-vaccines, but I'm not. In fact, I support the vaccines, and I certainly recommend people, especially the elderly people, to get vaccinated. But the reality is that nowadays, with this new pandemic, and also with the state telling us we're going to save you, that's always a good purpose on all this kind of issue, They never tell you, no, we want to control every single part of your life. They tell you that they want to save you. They're very worried about your health. Obviously, it's not, but some people really believe that. So what they said is giving and putting in your mobile phone all the details. In fact, now the Spanish government, if they want to, they will know exactly where I am sleeping in Budapest, because I have to fill a form to get in here. And also, once I go back to home, they will know exactly if I'm able or not to do it, because I have done a PCR this morning, and then my QR will tell me if I'm allowed or not to go back to my own country. So this madness that obviously if we asked about it about 3 years ago, and you would get the question, what do you think about being controlled by your mobile phone with a QR by your government that will allow you, depending on the result of that QR, if you're able to go to dinner, to go out with your friends, or go to traveling? Obviously, we will say, that's impossible. How governments are going to do that? People will not accept it. Well, the reality is we're living under this utopia, we can say. Dystopia must be the word. nowadays. So I think the technology has been using, as the Chinese government has been doing it for the last years, to control and know exactly what we're thinking and what we're doing. So people who are, and we're suing with the social media, with these fact checkers, also provided by governments, they telling us, no, we're going to protect you for the misinformation, and we want you to protect you from all the fake news that has been online. The reality is, and the pandemic has been a proof of it, there was some information that was certified by fake news, and 2 months later, they were verified like real news. So this is something that is happening nowadays, and also it's very, very important to fight against it. Obviously, technology has good points, but also has bad points, and governments, and especially this new Ideological Tyranny, is using them to control us and also to manipulate us.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the example of China is interesting because I think also what you're talking about with Gramsci, China has very much appreciated the power of culture to, and I suppose to create a kind of oligarchy. So one of the questions I had for you has to do with the role of education. So we're sort of, there's a long period of time where people are receiving information through the state, or perhaps, in your opinion, they shouldn't be getting it through the state, or I don't know. What, in addition to the question of, I suppose, journalism and information for adults, what do you see as the role of education now, and what might it be?
Well, I think education is very important, and we have to get clear one point. All tyrannies, what they try to control first, is education, media, and justice. That's essential. Yeah. And that's because, obviously, if you pass, when you're children, you pass more time on school than in your own house. So what is happening with education, in fact, we don't have an education. What we have is just manipulation, at least in too many West countries. Because the children has been, educated under dogmas which are false, and under the practice it's not true. So it's very important to also try to offer a new idea. And this is what happened with technology, with the social media, in fact. We have seen that social media opens a new window which is not being controlled by governments. So someone who has been studied as socialism is the best, economic system in the world can realize online that is not true. That's not true. So that's why they're trying to control also all the social networks. I mean, they want to give you only one way of thinking. And this is very important about the education. So I think we have to try to, especially this is something of part of the parents, to the children, to educate them under, independent way of thinking, because you have to be free thinkers in some way, somehow.
All right, I think that makes sense. So then I suppose another question I had for you would then have to do with, you've mentioned other parties, like other European nations like Hungary, the Visegrad nations, and so on. I'd be curious to get your sense of the specifics of this problem in the Spanish context. To give you one example, education in the U.S., you have a lot of private schools, or about charter schools. Not just about education, but just the extent to which the problems that you're describing are is there any aspect that is specific to Spain, or to what extent are they representative?
Well, I have to say in Spain it doesn't really happen in something different to another West countries. Maybe we can talk about immigration, as I said before, because our situation in the world. And what's happening is that, obviously, if you don't support these immigrants, I mean, in Spain, we have something that is good. And we have Hispano-America, we share our language and our culture with more than 500 million people. So that's something very interesting. Yeah. But once you defend, and I think when you talk about immigrants, obviously, it really depends on the situation of the country, but if it's need, why we don't try to get people who look like us? I mean, they will get involved in the society easier as the people who live in Hispano-America, that's pretty much as the Spaniards, even though some Spaniards, they think that we don't. But it is the reality. So I have to say, when we talk about immigration especially, we have to say there are some we talk about Islam immigration. And we have to be fair to say it. There is part of Muslims that they don't want to come here to live with us, that they want to come here to do what they were doing in their countries. It's very funny because nowadays the left, they supposed to be the moral and the people who defending women. But the reality is in some part of Brussels and Paris, women are suffering what they suffer in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the ones who are defending the rights of women is the right. Because we're saying we don't want this kind of immigration because it's against our moral values, against the Christian values that we've been fighting for it for a long years. So I think this is one of the things that is happening in Spain, especially because of our situation in the world with this Islam immigration that is still being a lot of people that obviously they don't suffer the consequences because they're quite rich and they have private security and all these issues. So they say, no, we have to be open-minded and everybody's welcome. So it's obviously also pretty similar what happened with Germany, with Angela Merkel politics, that has been always a disaster.
Now, see, this. I'm glad you bring this up because this comes back around in a way to the question about human nature that I was asking you about at the beginning, and the extent to which are we to look for solutions to these kinds of difficulties? For example, the failures of assimilation within France or Germany or Spain. Is the solution there education in the sense of facts and information and training of reason, or is the solution there the instilling of a different emotional narrative or the instilling of a different faith altogether? I suppose what I'm trying to get at is some people would say that reason or facts are not necessarily the answer. What is needed is a change of faith or a change of narrative, right? So what do you see as the solution in terms of solving this crisis of immigration, given the people are here and this division?
Unfortunately, as I said before, these bureaucrats, they don't suffer the consequences of the laws that have been approved. So what we're seeing with the immigration, especially you talk about France, what we have seen, and also in the Nordic countries as Denmark, for example, we have the Social Democrat Party. They've been approving a law that is more, we consider, if Orban does here tomorrow, that we consider like a Nazi or against, human rights. But what happened is because when people start to suffer in the problems, because it's very nice, if I ask you, okay, would you like to everybody come in because you want to save lives or not? Then obviously we'll say, yeah, everybody has the right to be here and get a new life. But the reality is not what we like or not, it's just what it is. So this is something that is happening in France and is happening in Denmark, in fact, with the Social Democrat Party. And now in France, everybody talks about immigration. Macron now has one of the main things in the debates, one of the main things he defends is to control Islam immigration. But that happens because the people start to get some pressure about it. I think in France maybe it's too late because we're having a lot of trouble, and we have seen with the terrorist attacks, the majority of them, they own the French nationality. They were not immigrants anymore. They were born in France. So I think it's very important to forget about our, political correctness and say things properly, that we have a problem with the Islam immigration and they don't want to live with us. They just want to conquer us.
And what's the way to change their mind? Is it possible?
Well, first of all, it's trying, don't be afraid of saying what you're thinking, because there's a lot of people that have fear because we're talking about, Islam, and as we have seen in Charlie Hebdo attempt and all these different, we have seen in France these attacks, terrorist attacks, then people said, okay, I prefer to be quiet and don't say it, just I don't want to get hurt. But we don't have to be that cowards. I mean, you have to be brave. And we have to be brave to say what we're thinking. And obviously, you have to be brave to defend our values. Our values are not those kind of values. So if you want to get here, you have to embrace the values that we defend in the West country. Know the values that we have been fighting for it for long years.
So the first question we have here is, do you think that... these are great questions. All right. Well... It's like we have a bunch of experts in the audience. All right. So, sorry. First question. Do you think that a certain kind of conservative renaissance, which is happening in Central Europe, will eventually happen in Spain and in the West in general?
I think it will.
Okay.
I think it will because, as I said before, people start to realize that this system, it's a fraud. We're not living better. We're living with more... insecure. We're having troubles with immigrations and all these issues that we talk about, global warming, taxes. So I think people start to realize that, this joke is getting over. So that's why they're trying to, this oligarchy system that I talk with, they're trying to get more harder these days. So we're seeing these attacks They're trying to be harder with Hungary, Poland. I mean, they want to get total control. And the pandemic has been a good option for them to get this under control, everything that we're doing in our simple lives.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see how reluctant some people are to see the pandemic end, almost because it's so useful to this end.
Yeah, of course. Sorry for interrupting. After the pandemic is over, then we will get the fear that the world is going to be over. So this is not going to ever end.
I see. Yeah, well, it's interesting. So talking about new voices coming up in this way. So we have a question from the audience. How do you see the media situation in Spain? Do you think it is dominated by the left, as dominated as it is elsewhere, or more balanced, or how would you position it relatively?
Absolutely dominated by the left. And this is something very interesting in Spain. We have two important televisions, and the only two main groups in Spain. The 95% of what you watch in TV in Spain belongs to two companies. So that's very interesting to understand why the social media, and I mean, I'm an example of it.
Yeah.
Why people follow me, because they don't find the information that I produce in my social accounts or in my new newspaper on television, on the main media. So in Spain, it's obviously controlled by the left. And also, even though the people who consider like right televisions, in fact, they defend it the same. These new dogmas, no one doubts about it in television. Something very important, very interesting. When we've been talking about vaccines, about pandemics, about lockdowns, about all these issues were happening, in Spain has not been any debate on television with different opinion. All of them were always agree about the lockdowns was the way to stop the spread of the virus, vaccines, and everybody has to be vaccinated. It doesn't matter if it's a guy 16 years old, he has to get vaccinated. There is no any debates. So the main question is, obviously, it has to be different opinions in television. That doesn't happen in Spain.
Now, actually, tying these two questions together then, in a way, I mean, one of the things we've seen in the United States is a cratering of trust. You know, the public really doesn't trust most of the media. So I'd be curious to know your thoughts on these sort of Spanish people's relationship with the media. Do they trust it? Do they not?
In Spain, it's very interesting because people, when they've been asked for it, they say, no, I don't trust in the polls. They say, I don't trust media. But in fact, the Spanish people is the most people who fall against fake news in all Europe. It's very interesting. But they consider themselves that they are more smart than the neighborhood. But the reality is we are the first ones who falls into the fake news. So we don't trust media, but we believe what media says. Something quite weird. Something in Spanish. You should be Spanish to understand it, yeah.
I see. Well, I was going to say, I guess it's good in that case that you're offering this alternative, and you can see why it's attractive.
I have to say that it's not only me. Unfortunately, it's a lot of people nowadays just fighting, and especially in YouTube and social media. They saying we are against this new system, and obviously we are not afraid to say what we're thinking. And that's something that is very important that we, especially young people, we have not to be afraid of it. So we have to be brave and defend our opinions.
So following up a little bit with the first question, take us out kind of, let's say in the near term, 3-5 years from now. I mean, people seem to be getting pretty sick of the lockdowns. Like, what direction do you see this breaking within Spain politically, or?
Well, in Spain, I think we have a problem because we are like in this transition that some people are accepting that what we supposed to be the, main political party against the government, which is PP, they just defend the same as the government, which is socialist government. So now what we got in Spain is Vox, but obviously they got this, stigma of being ultra-radical, fascists, and all these issues, when in fact Vox, when you read this, what they defending, it's the same that the PP, Partido Popular, was defending just 8 years ago. There is no difference. They just saying the same. So that helps you to realize how minds have changed and why we consider radical some issues that was defended by the moderates about 8 years ago. So I think in Spain now in that transition, but I think that fortunately people will realize, and I hope, this is maybe my hope, but I see that every single day there is, especially young people, who are saying, I don't want to vote left anymore. In fact, I have to say in the last elections in Madrid, the 70% of the youngest under 30 years old, they vote for the right. It didn't happen. Normally people used to vote for left. But I have to say that nowadays the left is like the new Inquisition, like Puritans. So, young people, they always try to be against the system. And we are the ones who are against this new system that probably is not probably anything good.
I think that's a very hopeful message. I think you're right. I think we're seeing a leftist overreach on a number of fronts. And it is interesting how, for my students, for example, for them, the left is the man, is the establishment, and so it's interesting to hear of similar rebelliousness in Spain among the younger generation. All right, well, we should wrap up there. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Jano, for your insights.